Hey, people. I was just talking to my sister earlier today, and I got her understanding that somebody's lying to us. And so she's trying to learn the ancient language, and she's using the orthodox approach by going to these scholars that are telling the same old lie. And she told me that Genesis means Bereshit in Hebrew, which means the beginning. I mean, there's zero truth in any of that. None of those words are the same. So I explained to her about the Bereshit, and probably comes from Homer's writings. He probably started a lot of his stories with Bereshit. And so this Bereshit, this B here, is this N, and that's the only thing that's correct there. N. And the rest of it is receipt. And that's a play on words. Re is what you get back. When you go shopping and you get your goods, and a receipt to get it back. So when the boat would pull in, they would unload their goods and they'd weigh it all up. And a man would write you a receipt for your goods, and he would put it in clay. And it was receipted writings in clay, and that's where that come from. In your receipt. And then you would go out and party on the town and buy up everything that you want to take to the next town. And so that's what that means, is in receipt. And so I'm going to show y'all how I find better meanings to these words. But let me just show you this first line of Genesis first. This is what it looks like. Ba, in the receipt. And to bear. Bear is the receipt in your pocket. And receipt to bear, Mael, reads backwards, Mael, that's the backbone, but the God is the words. In receipt, bear the words to the same is what hears. And that's saying that this language is the Teutonic language. The visible words, Mael, the visible words are the same is, final M is a S. The same is what hears. It's the same words that you're hearing. It means the Teutonic language. It means the shapes are the same as the creatures on the earth, that you hear from them. The same as the sound. So this word Genesis, it means the exact opposite of what they tell us Genesis means. How God created. And the way I find these is I find them in words. I think of a word that's used in. Epigenesis is the stepwise process by which genetic information is modified, environmental influences is translated into the substance and behavior of an organism. It's the theory that an embryo develops from successive differentiation of an originally undifferentiated structure. It's like one cell, it changes, it evolves, it changes into what it needs to grow. Like a lot of the lizards, they can break off arms or legs, tails, and their cells, the stem cells, will know what to grow back. It'll grow back cartilage, bone, and skin and muscle, whatever it has to. And so that's the exact opposite. It's more like evolution. And Genesis is more like evolution. And so epi, they say in Latin, that just means on. And so to check up on that, things like that, I just Google, words beginning with epi. And I'll just read all the words. And especially the medical words, because they couldn't change them. They didn't get all the medical books, and so those words stayed the same. And I'll start at the bottom of the list, the shorter words. An epic is a long poem, and so epi is in on, and K is fold, unfold or unfold, to unfold the story. It goes through an epic. And I'll look at all the smaller words, and some of them I have to look up. I don't even know what they mean. and to get a better idea of what part of those words mean. And then when I look at it in the longer word, I can divide them and see what part of those words meant what and what had been changed. An epigram is a witticism, an ingenious saying, not to be confused with an epigraph, which is an inscription on a building or a statue. And then I'll Google words ending with graphy, and I'll start at the bottom. And you see most of the words that end with graphy will have a O in front of them. Geography, the geo, the earth, to graph. And so, graph means more of chart it in its place than write. They say it comes from graphene, to write. And so all the ancient writings, they graphed everything, try to figure out how things were made, and they made graphs. And that's why when it says according to, it'll say kata. And so that means, under which line, under this type, the typo. The art and technique of printing with a movable type. The type to graph. When you're typesetting, you're putting all the type, in its column, putting everything, in its graph. But if you look at epigram on Wiki, their story starts to fall apart there. An epigram is a brief, interesting, memorable, and sometimes surprising or satirical statement. The word is derived from the Greek epigram, meaning inscription, from epigraphine, meaning to write on. And so it just said don't confuse them, the epigraph and the epigram. But if the epi is on and the graph is right, then they're saying een is to write on. But an een, in chemistry and medicine, an een is an inhabitant, and that's where your on would come from. And so it's like there's two ons in the writing. It means there's two meanings in an epigraphing. So when you see writings on statues and columns, there's two meanings in there. There's one for everybody, and there's one for the ones in the know. It'll be hidden in inscriptions. So the king of the epigram was Theon, in the 1st century BC. And he was the author of the lexicon to the Greek comedians, the comic key lexis. Lex is a dictionary, the comic key lexis. And so it's a dictionary of one-liners, like a comedian might use. Oh, Jerry Seinfeld, he probably read it. Just a bunch of the comic key lexis, the one-liners, the one-line epigrams. And he was so great that they made him God, Theon. That would be the word for your God in the Greek Bible. The Greek, they say Allah, it just meant but. But it had no meaning. Theon was their God. Your God, Theon. So if you Google the most ancient image of Jesus on the cross, it'll bring you here to this Alexamenos graffito. They say it's somewhere around the 1st century, they're not sure. It was closed up in a cellar. And it's an image of a mule-headed person on a cross. Except it doesn't say Jesus anywhere on there. It says Alexamenos Sabeti Theon. You can see it here, Alexamenos Sabeti Theon. And so they'll try to stretch this. They put this Ale, Allah, this is God in the Hebrew Bible, and they'll put it on this Zamenos to say it's Alexamenos. And this Sabeti They don't have an interpretation. They say it was a misspelling. It was supposed to be an AI that means worships. But Sebeti is a liver. Sebet in the southern Soto. That's the language from around Ethiopia. The eastern, southern Africa. They say it means liver. But if you hit the translator here, you see it also means courage. And that's why when you see in this Narmer palette and they're marching into war, one of them's got a kidney up on the staff and the other's got a liver. It's a liver because the dog's eating it. It means courage. And so when a Greek word ends with this "os," it means it's turning a verb into a noun. Like the bandit, is the steal, and the banditos are the thieves, So the one that examines, the examiners, the ones that will examine, the courage of Theon, of the god of the one-liners. And so they're saying that it has to do with Christians and Jews because of the donkey or the mule head. And they said that the Christians and the Jews worshipped the mule. But this Y up here, this represents Virgo or Isis or Mother Earth. This is a crotch. And so, the cross represents Easter. So they don't have a clear date. They're thinking it's about the 1st to the 3rd century. And the location is on Palatine Hill. That's one of the 7 hills of Rome. I think Aventine and Palatine were the 2 spots they were thinking about, when Romulus and Remus were deciding where they were going to build their city. And you could tell that Romulus won, and that's why it's called Rome. And they're saying it was, after Caligula died, that it was a boarding school, and probably some page boys wrote that. And it's taken to mean a mocking of depiction of the Christian act of worship. It doesn't look like he's worshiping. And a lot of these pictures, if you look at them, you could see he's got a little Jewish cap on. This is just scratched in the wall, and it was hard to see, so they put a paper on there and chalked over it. And the brightest one looks like this. And it's not the face or the body of a worshiper. And it looks like they probably had hid some other writing in here. It looks like it said something else and was changed. And they say the inscription is usually taken to be a mocking depiction of a Christian in the act of worship. At the time, the pagans derided Christians for worshiping a man who had been crucified. And the donkey's head, don't even say donkey, say mule. We all know what mule-headed means. You're being mule-headed, you're stubborn. And the crucifixion would both have been considered insulting depictions. And Tertullian, writing in the 2nd or 3rd century, reports that Christians, along with the Jews, were accused of worshipping such a deity. He also mentions the apostate Jew who carried around the Carthage and the caricature of a Christian with an ass's ears and hooves. And the most common interpretation is that this graffiti depicts Jesus of Nazareth. However, Hudson McLean considers the image can either depict Jesus or Anubis. Other searchers consider that the graffiti represents either possibly a scene of the Gnostic worship representing the Egyptian god Anubis, or that the crucified being was the god Set or Typhon Set. The Typhon Set. And so there's a huge writing about Typhon here. And Typhon was the enemy of the gods. The Typhon Set is a printing press. And sometimes called the typos. The typos are the enemies of writers. and especially if the typos are type-on set, where you're going to print many copies of a typo. In the stories of Typhon, he had 100 heads, 50 heads, or hundreds hands, 50 hands. And so, with 25 letters, you could turn them upside down and you have 50. And then you could stack two of them up sideways, the same, up either way, that gives you another 50. And all the ancient writers talked about it was that it was the most evil of all the evils. A typo, if you're a writer, a typo is the most evil of all evils. And being the offspring of Gaia, the earth. And the strength was with his hands in all that he did. And the feet of the strong God were untiring. From his shoulders grew 100 heads of snake, a fearful dragon, and dark flickering tongues. And from under the brows of his eyes in his marvelous heads flashed fire. And fire burned from his heads as he glared. And there were voices in all his dreadful heads which uttered every kind of sound unspeakable. And for at one time they made sounds such that the gods understood, but at another the noise of a bull bellowing aloud in a proud, ungovernable fury, and at another the sound of a lion, relentless of heart, and another sound like whelps, wonderful to hear, and again at another he would hiss, so that his high mountains re-echoed. And so all the ancient writers wrote about this typo. And he challenged Zeus for rule of the cosmos. The earliest mention of Typhon was his only occurrence in Homer, is a passing reference in the Iliad to Zeus striking the ground around where Typhon lies defeated. And Nicander has all the gods but Zeus and Athena transform into animal form and flee into Egypt. And Apollo became a hawk, Hermes an ibis, Ares a fish, Artemis a cat, Dionysius a goat, Hercules a fawn, and Hephaestus an ox, and Leto a mouse. And Homer describes a place he calls the couch, Typhos, which he locates in the land of the Aramaic. That's said to be the language of Jesus, Aramaic, where Zeus lashes the land about Typhos with his thunderbolts. Presumably this is the same land where, according to Hesiod, Typhon's mate, Echidna, keeps guard, they in Aramaic. And while mentioning Cerberus and other monsters as being the offspring of Echidna and Typhon, the mythographer Accusa-Laws in the 6th century BC adds that the Caucasian eagle that ate the liver ate the courage of Prometheus. Typhon was joined in love with, this may be pronounced the hiding, Hidna, the hidden. So Typo said to be the son of Gaia, angry at the destruction of the giant, slanders Zeus to Hera. So Hera goes to Zeus's father, Cronus, and Cronus gives Hera 2 eggs smeared with his own semen, time, and planted them in the earth, Gaia. And from them would be born one who would overthrow Zeus. Nonnus gives Typhon many other animal heads, including leopards, lions, bulls, boars, bears, cattle, wolves, and dogs, which combine to make the cries of all wild beasts together, and a babel of screaming sounds. Nonnus also gives Typhon legions of arms innumerable. And where Nicander had only said that Typhon had many hands, Ovid had given Typhon 100 hands. Nonnus gives Typhon 200 hands. And incensed Typhon unleashes devastation upon the world, Animals are devoured, and rivers turn to dust, seas made to dry land, and land laid to waste. That's a clue on how they changed the language, where the rivers are dust and the seas are dry land and the land is waste. The Typhon's name had a number of variants, but its earliest forms were the Typo-Whos and the Typhon. Pindar calls Typhon the enemy of the gods, and we must go down and change his babble. So in this image, in the image, Alexamenos is portrayed venerating an image of the crucifix. However, this practice was not known to be part of Christian worship until the 4th or 5th century. So donkey worship was called onolatry. It's the supposed worship of a donkey. It seems to have been commonly believed at the time that Christians practiced onolatry. It was based on the misconception that Jews worshipped a god in the form of a donkey, a claim made by a Peon in 3020 BC. And so a Peon, that means nobody, a Peon. But a Peon was Hellenized Egyptian. A P is behind or after, and on is light. All the names have a meaning. And he was a Hellenized Egyptian grammarian, sophist, and a commentator on Homer. He was born in the Suez Oasis and flourished in the first half of the 1st century A.D. His name is sometimes incorrectly spelt with 2 P's. And some sources, as the Suda called him, a son of Pleistonices, while others more correctly state that Pleistonices was only a surname and that he was the son of Poseidonus. And Peon studied Alexandria under Apollonius, a sophist, the son of... And Peon studied Alexandria under Apollonius the sophist and Didymus, from whom he inherited his love for Homeric poems. He settled in Rome at an unknown date and taught rhetoric at the successor of the grammarian of Theon, of God, until the reign of Claudius. Peon appears to have enjoyed an extraordinary reputation for his extensive knowledge and his versatility of an orator, but the ancients are unanimous in censoring his ostentatious vanity. He declared that everyone whom he mentioned in his works would be immortalized. He placed himself by the side of the greatest philosophers in ancient Greece, and used to say that Alexandria ought to be proud of having a man like himself among its citizens. And it is likely the name of Symbolum Mundi. Mundi is the world, a symbol of the world, by which Tiberius was accustomed to call him, was meant to express both his loquacity. That's where you get your word loco, and also your word quack. And itty is where you get your word city. It means place of. The loco quack place. And his boastful character. He is spoken of as the most active of grammarians. He was really funny. He was nutsy funny. He was a quack. He was a comedian. According to the Suda, his surname was Machthos. Machthos, toil, trouble, hardship, distress, exertion, which he usually explained as describing the zeal and labor with which he prosecuted his studies. In the reign of Caligula, Peon traveled about Greece and was received everywhere with the highest honors as the great interpreter of Homer. About the same time, 38 A.D., the inhabitants of Alexandria raised complaints against the Jews residing in the city and endeavored to curtail their rights and privileges. And they sent an embassy to Emperor Caligula, which was headed by Peon, for he was a skillful speaker and known to entertain a great hatred of the Jews. They later also sent an embassy, which was headed by Philo. Philo, that's where your word love comes from, and also cat, the feline. And I don't remember which books it was, but there's some letters in some of the books that are signed by Philo in some of the books of the Bible. In this transaction, a Peon appears to have overstepped the limits of his commission, for he not only brought forward the complaints of his fellow citizens, but endeavored to excite the emperor's anger against the Jews by reminding him that they refused to erect statues to him and swear to his sacred name. The result of his embassy, as well as remaining a part of Peon's life, are unknown. But if we may believe the account of his enemy Josephus, he died of a disease which he had brought upon himself by the dissolute mode of life. And so Peon wrote several works, none of which have survived. It was all destroyed. But we find some of his epigrams in the Suda, written in the 10th century. We find references to Peon as a writer of epigrams. And so maybe that wasn't a mule, maybe that was an ass, the mind of an ass. That's what Cynthia Damon writes. And so this probably says all examines the courage of Theon. And why? Why is the letter of examination? But why is it like that? So there's a lot more to this story, but my program's messing up. But there's some things I wanted to show in here before I went on down through Revelations 19, so you'd understand some of the words that run into there. I'm going to cut this off here. Have a good day.